Does Utah need Cam Rising to beat Arizona State, or can Isaac Wilson bounce back from a lackluster performance against the Wildcats in order to beat the Sun Devils on Saturday? That's what we're breaking down on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. If this is your first time tuning into our show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with everyone in the YouTube comments, as well as on social media. We can follow our show at Locked On Utes on X. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by FanDuel. You can place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. You can visit FanDuel.com to get started. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to be joined by PFF's college football analyst, Dalton Wasserman, on today's show. And Dalton, when you're looking at this Utah team, this is a big game for them because they are, of course, coming off a loss, sitting here at 4-1, and we're not sure if they're going to have the services of Cam Rising. So the question then, and we're never going to know because Kyle Whittingham has made it very clear how he's going to handle this injury saga. It's frustrating, but it's the way it's going to be, where week in and week out, you won't know if Cam's going to be back until he's actually on the field taking a snap. So if Isaac is the guy out there, can Utah beat Arizona State? I believe the answer to that question is yes. It will not be easy. This is a much different Arizona State team than the one that Utah beat 55-3 last year. I mean, just over the years, the games against Arizona State have been pretty lopsided in Utah's favor. But the but the Sun Devils are much improved when you look at what Kenny Dillingham has done there. Skattebo was good last year, but I feel like they made strides on defense. Leavitt's been a nice addition at quarterback. But this Utah team will have been the best team Arizona State has played yet. And I do feel like the talent that Utah has in the trenches might be the biggest reason why I still give Utah. I mean, Utah's still favored on ESPN predictors. They're favored by FanDuel. This is still a really good Utah team. And even though Arizona State's trending in the right direction, I think it's still going to be tough for the Sun Devils to topple Utah.
Look, I think it's going to be a tough game both ways. The one thing I do know, no matter how this goes, is this is going to be a really physical game. And I'll tell you, Arizona State's defense especially, really fun to watch. I won't sit here and tell you they have one superstar player. Got a handful of guys who are really good. CJ Fight on the inside on the defensive line. Keyshawn Elliott's a fun player to watch at linebacker. But the big thing with Arizona State, they don't do a whole lot of complicated stuff on defense. They line up in single high, and they just want to hit people. It's just what they do. They may play harder than any team that I've watched this year. I honestly, they fly to the football. They're fast. And even if you make a play, they make you pay for it. This is about to be a really physical football game on both sides. And I know Utah usually is the team that tries to make it that way, especially against some other finesse teams. But Arizona State's about it, man. I'm telling you right now, win or lose, they are going to give you their best shot. They're going to be hitting all night for all 60 minutes. It is just in their nature. They're super physical. And if you're not ready for a physical game, they can beat you.
Going to be a fun Friday night game in Tempe. Looking at a little bit more about this Arizona State team, they have the 31st ranked defense in yards allowed per game. So that is going to be something where Wilson, coming off not a great showing in the second half against Arizona, how's that going to look there? Well, I think the key for Utah is to not let the game fall on Wilson's shoulders if he is a starter. I think Utah has to be better about establishing the run game. Mekhi Bernard, before the bye week, was 6th in rushing yards, coming off of the things he was able to do the first few weeks of the season, and now stumbled back a little bit. But I do think it's a Utah team that they got to try to run the ball better. They got to stick with the run game longer. If this team falls behind big and it has to be Wilson play after play, that's where I feel like they can get in trouble too. But this Arizona State defense, they're a defense too that they have given up over 130 yards on the ground in 3 straight weeks, over 200 yards through the air in 3 straight weeks, and those 3 have all come from the best opponents they will have played. Yes, Utah had their red zone issues against Arizona, but this is Andy Ludwig still. He's done a lot of really good things as the offensive coordinator for this Utah team. Wilson overall has gotten better week to week, had really good moments in the first half against Arizona, not as good, obviously, in the second half. But I do like what Utah is doing up front. I think their offensive line has been a nice surprise. I think you factor that in with the performance of Mekhi Bernard and the ability of Dorian Singer and Brant Kuithe to get open. And I think that's the recipe for success for Utah. How do you feel like this Arizona State team matches up with those pieces specifically, Dalton?
If it is Wilson in the game and Utah's trying to lean away from their passing game a bit, because the one thing Wilson has to get better with is ball security, right? He's already got seven. He's already got 7 turnover-worthy plays in just 3 starts. And look, Arizona State's going to be loading up to stop the run too. I think we're really going to get a battle in the trenches between Utah's offensive line, who's run blocking really well, and an Arizona State defense who you mentioned some of the yards, but they haven't had really a lack of efficiency in run defense. They've been a lot better than they were last year. Per our metrics, they're 31st in the country in run defense grade, which is a huge jump from where they were last year. I'm not sure they were inside the top 100 last year. They're physical, and at all levels, they just, again, they like to hit people. And I think getting Bernard going obviously is the first key for this Utah offense, right? You can get into the play action. You can take some of the pressure if you can bring safeties up and get those linebackers moving up, because there's definitely holes in these zone defenses to work behind these linebackers in Arizona State's defense. But you have to put yourself in good situations that aren't predictable, because if you do get into predictable passing situations after they stop the run, they do have some fun blitz packages that they can bother an offense with. So if you can keep them in good situations, if you get Bernard going 5-6 yards at a time, it's going to be a physical game. And the one thing Arizona did well last week against Bernard, when he did get the ball, they did tackle well, right? He didn't have quite as many yards after contact as he did the previous couple of games. I think Arizona State, they're going to be loading up to stop the run and stop Bernard. If Utah gets Bernard going and they get into play action, you mentioned Kuithe, and I think Dorian Singer's a huge part of this game. I think when I watch Arizona State, I think their corners in coverage are probably the weakest part of their defense. If you can get in advantageous situations and get Singer to take advantage of those guys on the outside and in the spaces up the seams against this defense, because they run a lot of cover 3, that's where you want to beat Arizona State. But if that's where it's going to be, you got 2 teams that want to run and stop the run, and Mekhi Bernard, is a huge key to that.
Absolutely. When we look at this matchup, I will lean, if we're doing who has the advantage, Utah offense versus Arizona State defense, I would lean slightly towards Utah because of the offensive line play, because of those weapons we mentioned and the deficiencies in ASU's secondary. Even with Wilson, I've just seen enough from him to be able to hit some of those big throws that even if he does, he's more than likely going to turn over in this game at least once, just based on the track record that he has shown as of recently. But I do feel like Utah's offensive line and Mekhi and just some of those playmakers we mentioned is why I feel like they will have success against an ASU defense that has allowed over 28 points in 3 straight weeks in a row too. But who do you give the advantage to on this side of the ball?
Honestly, I think if Wilson plays, to me, it's just about a push. I'm worried about his balls. I'm worried about his ball security against a very aggressive team. If Cam Rising plays, I do think you get a little more of an advantage working towards in Utah's favor, because that added dimension in the passing game. It's pretty clear to me that Arizona State's biggest holes are through the air, right? And if you can just add enough and get enough balls to Singer and Kuithe, then you've got a real advantage. And that's kind of where Texas Tech hurt him. Taj Brooks had a good game against Arizona State, but it was really more about Baron Morton hitting some of the easier throws, the slants, the things that got into the windows in zone coverage, right? So the more balance you have against Arizona State, the better. If Wilson is in there, I think this is a very even matchup.
Feels that way. It feels that way. I said slight advantage to Utah offense. You say if Wilson's in there, it's a push either way. So it's going to be fun to see. And the Cam Rising factor is something we'll be monitoring all week. There is, of course, another side of the ball. I want to talk about how the Utah defense is going to fare against Kenny Dillingham's offense. We're going to be diving into that in one moment. But first, want to take an opportunity to talk to you all about one of the sponsors of today's episode of Locked On Utes. It's our great friends at FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get the hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. There are so many great matchups, whether it's the MLB playoffs, NFL is underway. We got 5 weeks under the belt now, so we know who are the real teams, who are kind of those pretenders still. And then as it relates to college football, let's talk about the game that we're covering here. Utah is favored by 6.5 right now against Arizona State. It's always interesting to monitor how these lines move throughout the week, as it could potentially be something that relates to the availability to Cam Rising or just whatever information is out there that caused these lines to move. It's always something worth watching. At the moment, I do like Utah by 6.5, but however you guys are leaning, make sure you head over to FanDuel, whether you want to get in on college football or NFL. Once again, you can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com today. All right, Dalton, turn it over to the opposite side of the ball. This Utah defense is in a very interesting position to me because it's a Utah defense that has not given up over 25 points on the season yet, but they are coming off a performance against Arizona where I didn't feel like they played great. I definitely felt like they played good enough for this team to win. They got Arizona off the field enough to put the offense in a position to succeed, and they didn't capitalize. And Noah Fafita made a lot of incredible throws to beat them, but now they are going, but they also last week gave up 10 yards per carry to Arizona's lead back. So that is something where Utah is obviously going to have to be better in that. And they've been a strong run defense last year. They were a top 5 rush defense to start the year. They'd been pretty good until that happened against Arizona. And this is not an easy running attack to contain. Both Leavitt and Skattebo have averaged over 5 yards per carry. Having a quarterback that can use his legs is the ultimate deal breaker sometimes because you do everything right as a defense and then, forgot to account for the quarterback running. That can be tough. And Skattebo is a guy who runs incredibly hard. He does a great job of bouncing runs to the outside. I don't expect this Utah defense to have a poor tackling performance yet again, but I do believe this is a much tougher test than it's been for them in the past because ASU is on this side of the ball as well. Kenny Dillingham's done a great job. They're much improved.
Even if you're going to have a better tackling performance, he's a really hard guy to tackle, right? He's just a big dude. He's not the fastest guy in the world, but you talk about just a football player. Skattebo will run through a wall for you, and he's not easy to tackle. And then Sam Leavitt has brought that dimension with his legs. That's really the biggest reason. That's the way their offense moves is these two guys read option games, sometimes Leavitt out on some bootlegs and running while he's scrambling. I think this is the focus, just like the other side of the ball to me is stopping the run for Arizona State. The focus has to be stopping the run against Utah because I'll be honest with you, Arizona State's run game is better than Arizona's, and it's a lot more diverse with the way that they use Leavitt and all the numbers. There's always, the other thing too with the Sun Devils, there's always a trick play or two in the book, and we saw it last year. Skattebo was even in the Wildcat a lot. He can throw the football. Sometimes you see double reverses. There's a lot of different things that they mess around with in this offense, and it's centered around these two guys. So it starts the same way with Utah as it does with ASU on the other side of the ball. They need to stop the run. They need to stop the run. If you get Arizona State in long down and distance situations, I think the single biggest advantage Utah has in this game is their secondary against an Arizona State receiving core that is not all that great. There's not a lot of speed. They really struggle to get open downfield. It's not as dangerous a passing attack as it is a rushing attack. If they can get Arizona State in 3rd and 8, 3rd and 10, I think Utah's secondary is the biggest advantage in this game.
Very interesting too, because this is a ASU team that they have hit some big plays down the field, but I think you're right, Dalton. The consistency hasn't always been there. And Utah DBs, they will get beat. You can get them for a 20-yard pass, but every game we've seen them pick off a pass. You look at against last week or a couple weeks ago now, Noah Fafita was picked off by Teo Johnson in the end zone. We know, what's his name? Alan Bowman got benched because of how poorly he performed against this Utah secondary. And we don't know if Utah is going to have Karene Reed back. I know going into the season, you guys at PFF were extremely high on what Karene Reed's been able to do. So that's been a big loss for them. In fact, I believe that was the biggest thing wrong with their rush defense a few weeks ago was not having him out there and some of the other guys who aren't as experienced missing assignments and gaps, as well as defensive line and kind of doing some weird thing. Like you had guys rushing up field, kind of taking themselves out of the play. So those are the things that I expect Utah to straighten out in this matchup, but it will be easier said than done. When you look at a guy like Leavitt, you already mentioned that the receiving core isn't the greatest, but if it does come down to, the running game is maybe not shut down, but you are only getting maybe 3 yards a carry instead of 5. How much confidence do you have? I won't just say to make passes downfield, but to make plays, since we have seen him as an effective scrambler too.
I think I trust Leavitt to make the plays more so than I trust their receivers to separate right now. And I think the big thing is going to be the balance for Utah because Leavitt will take off and run on you. Utah's a team notorious for running a lot of man-to-man coverage. So, one of the big things against man-to-man coverage is the quarterback run game and whether you're going to have a spy, whether you're going to have 2 spies, who are you going to spy Sam Leavitt with? Because if everybody's got their back turned and they are downfield, he will take off. So who's got eyes on Sam Leavitt up front? If he's going to move around the pocket and try to make plays, right? I think if it does come down to Arizona State is consistently in 3rd and 9, or even 3rd and 7, some sort of 3rd and long situation, I do think Utah's at a big advantage. But that is a key for me too, is when you talk about Utah being a heavy man coverage team, and I think they're going to go into this game feeling like, hey, we can line up and we can play cover one and we can figure out what to do up front because we feel we have the advantage, especially at corner with Zemiah Vaughn, with guys like Smith Snowden at corner over these receivers. I think they're going to challenge these receivers to get open early as long as they don't, if they don't give up too many yards on the ground. Again, and now if you're talking about 3rd and 2, or if you talk about ASU picking up first downs on early downs, it's really going to be, to me, on this side of the ball, a big down and distance question. But I fully expect Utah not to get out of that man coverage that they usually are in. And the big question is going to be, how many times are they going to let Sam Leavitt escape the pocket and take those chunks of rushing yards when they have their backs turned?
Not an easy quarterback to bring down either in the pocket. He's a guy who can break free. I like the way he navigates the pocket, and that is going to be something that is interesting to watch this week. So I think, Dalton, one of the big questions we have to ask going into this game then is, this is, agree or disagree, this is the best defense that Arizona State has played so far.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Not in your head. And then, so same thing with Utah. I think this is the best rushing attack that they have faced so far, which is crazy because they've played Ollie Gordon, but we have seen week after week just Oklahoma State's really going through it right now in a lot of ways.
I would also make an argument there. Taj Brooks with Texas Tech is really good, and he's the one who beat them as well. And Oklahoma State's really been struggling. I would say probably Texas Tech, I would argue, with Taj Brooks healthy now, was maybe the best one they've played.
Yes, yeah, you are right there. Taj Brooks for what they have faced as well. So when you're looking in the trenches, do you have more confidence in Arizona State continuing to control games on the ground, or do you have more confidence in Utah's front seven bouncing back after a out of character performance?
That's a hard one, because I really think those are the two matchups of the game, right? I think those are the matchups that are going to decide this game. And I do think the level of physicality Arizona State plays with, I think it evens it out a little bit. I will say you are right. Utah's offensive line is playing very, very well. And I actually think better than they played last year. There was kind of a lot of mental mistakes, especially in run blocking up. I do think it's a pretty even matchup on that front. And I think a big thing is who wins on the inside between the tackles. Because I'll tell you, so there's plays where these Arizona State defensive tackles, they get into the backfield. They cause problems between the tackles. And it's really going to be about who's just more fundamentally sound, more physical up front. I think this is going to be a fist fight game. I think, again, if Isaac Wilson's in there, what maybe can he give you on the ground as well? Because we know what Sam Leavitt can do on the Arizona State side. I think that's a big thing with Arizona State too. You got two threats back there. If Wilson can give you a second threat back there in the backfield too, then you're onto something, right? A running quarterback is usually the hardest thing to defend. So I do think you have a really even matchup, and this matchup of running and stopping the run is going to decide who wins this game.
Yeah, on both sides of the ball, absolutely. And as we look to Wilson, Utah tried to use some quarterback designs runs against Arizona because Kansas State's Avery Johnson had so much success. But Wilson was not as comfortable. So that is something that will be interesting to see, is how can Utah put Wilson in a more comfortable position. I do feel like his comfort's grown each week, we are talking about, I think he's still 17, maybe he's 18 at this point now. He's been doing it long enough, but like we were talking about the true freshman. So I do feel like the comfort of when to scramble and things of that nature are continuing to grow as well. But going back to the Utah defense versus Arizona State offense really quick, Dalton, one thing we got to be fired up about this matchup is Morgan Scalley versus Kenny Dillingham. I think it's two of the best minds we have on each side of the ball in the sport, and the chess match between them is going to be electric.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Kenny Dillingham, I'll tell you, he just gets his guys to play so hard, right? And I think they don't mix it up a whole lot other than some third down blitz packages. But man, oh man, are those guys motivated? I'm telling you, Keyshawn Elliott, especially number 44 at linebacker for Arizona State, this is a key player to watch, right? And you talk about Utah doing a better job getting up on the second level, getting up on linebackers, and then letting Bernard have space to work after contact. I thought that was a big thing, that Arizona's linebackers played really well last week. This is a guy who can be a problem right in the middle. You often see him lined up right over the center, and he flies to the football. He can shed blocks. Keyshawn Elliott's a guy that I'm looking for Arizona State. If they're going to stop the run, it's going to be him. But no, I think you're right. It's two offensive minds you see, or I should say one offensive mind, and Kenny Dillingham, a great defensive mind, although he's originally an offensive coordinator at Oregon, right? So you've just got this matchup of guys who pull out all the stops. These are two teams. I expect trick plays. I expect reverses. I expect flea flickers, wildcats, everything. And honestly, I think the biggest premium in this game for both of these coaches is actually finishing drives, right? And I think that was also another thing with Utah against Arizona. How different would that game have looked had they finished some of those early drives? And we saw them get stopped on fourth down early, right? And I think when you're two teams that are grinding it out and running the ball, right, you need to find a way to either punch it in or make one or two explosive plays that get you into the end zone. I think scoring, and I know they say it in every game, and it's such a common theme now, but in this game especially, that I do think is going to be relatively low scoring, something like a 20-17 game, getting 7 instead of 3 in those moments, even if you have to create them through tricks or gadgets or whatever you have to do, that's going to be a huge premium, because I think that's something that cost Utah in that game against Arizona. They didn't finish drives.
All right, 1,000%. We're actually going to touch on that in one moment. But before we leave this topic, same thing for this side of the ball, Utah defense versus Arizona State offense. I will yet again give a slight advantage to the Utah defense. You mentioned the big advantage that Utah has in the secondary. And I still just look at this defensive line, and I know they did not perform. They still had good moments, and some people said they didn't get pressure against Arizona. I disagree with that. I just felt like Noah Fifita made plays on the move that I gave him a lot of credit towards, but it was a step back from a performance we're used to seeing from them. I expect this defense off a bye to respond because of the experience and the personnel that they have. So I will give the advantage to Utah's defense on this side of the ball. How do you lean in this matchup?
I have a slight edge to Utah's defense, too. I do think Arizona State and Skattebo can match the physicality up front, yes, but it is the biggest advantage in this game for Utah is their secondary. If Utah wins this game, if they go in there and get a win out of this, we're going to be talking about their coverage unit and just how Arizona State's receivers weren't able to separate, and Sam Leavitt was constantly having to throw into tight windows. I really think Zamiah Vaughn, Smith Snowden, Cam Calhoun, these guys at corner especially, I think they're the biggest guys to watch in this game. I think it's an advantage. We know Utah can cover. And honestly, Utah did not cover all that poorly against Arizona. Sometimes Noah Fifita, who's a great quarterback, just makes plays, right? He just makes plays. They couldn't get many sacks on him, if any. And it's just he's one of those guys who can just do it, right? And look, let's be real. They held Tetsuo and McMillan to 50 yards. That's the goal, right? That's the goal right there. I mean, if you do that, you should beat Arizona. So Utah's really good in coverage. I think they're going to challenge them with press man coverage like they challenge a lot of teams, and I have a slight edge for Utah on that side.
It's going to be a great matchup. And you'd mentioned it earlier, Dalton, about how this Utah team, if they had executed in the red zone, maybe it's a different story against Arizona. I want to talk about that specifically and just overall the state of Utah's football program entering this game in one moment. But first, if you're still looking to get tickets for the game down in Tempe, where Utah will travel to play Arizona State this Friday, you have to get Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. There are so many fantastic features I love about Game Time, whether it's the panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, their lowest price guarantee where Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference, or how about Game Time's ticket coverage, where your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege. That's capital LONC in college, so that each letter of the word, but there are no spaces. Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Game Time is your place for not just sports, but concerts, comedy, and theater events near you. So make sure you guys head over and download Game Time. Use that code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, Dalton, I think the very last thing before we touch on this state of this Utah team, I just want to ask you about, and we've hinted at it before. This Arizona State team, they do not have a win against a ranked opponent yet. But I do think when you turn on the tape, I buy this Arizona State team. I don't think they're a Big 12 contender yet. I don't think they're one of the top 5 teams in this conference. But I do think they are a team that is capable of beating any team in this conference pretty much, because it is still an open conference. I think Kenny Dillingham has things rolling there. I have given Utah the edge on both sides of the ball. This is Locked On Utes. I will admit I am a biased man, but Arizona State is absolutely capable of winning this game, especially on their own field. And I am expecting a really good one down in Tempe.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and you said it exactly right with Arizona State. And I think we need to look no further than last year when they almost beat Washington. They only lost that game 15-7 against Michael Penix and all those guys. They played maybe a better defensive game than anyone outside of Michigan against Michael Penix and that attack. And Kenny Dillingham, they just come up with great game plans on defense every week. And they play, again, I think the biggest thing, it sounds funny because I'm the analytics guy and everything's always quantitative and all that stuff, but they just play so darn hard. Like that you throw on the tape and you're like, wow, they just fly around and they want to hit people and they're so physical. And these are the types of teams that honestly, I almost want to say they're annoying to play against because you just go, it's 60 minutes of fist fighting football. And I think that's exactly, I really think this game, Arizona State is going to feel good about it because Utah plays at a similar pace. I think if you're going to beat Arizona State in a more dominant fashion, you have to get up tempo and you have to sling the ball around. I think some of those no-huddle, throwing the ball type of teams are the ones that hurt them with their zone coverages and finding those windows. I think this game will be played at a pace that both teams kind of like, but a pace that it's close to the vest, right? And it is physical and it's hard hitting and it feels like a 5-yard gain is a win, right? Like that sort of thing. This is an old school football game. Arizona they can play physically with anybody. And eventually, against certain teams or talent, there's a ceiling on it for sure. I'm with you. I don't think they're any sort of inner circle Big 12 contender, but they're dangerous. And if you mess around with them, Washington found that out last year. A couple other teams found that out last year in close games. This team can run, they can stop the run, and they will hit you all day long.
The days of this program losing 55-3 to legit contenders, that part is over. You have to be at your best to beat this squad. You mentioned the fist fight off the top of the show. That's what this game is going to be, and it's going to be a lot of fun to see it all play out on Friday. But before we get to Friday, I just want to take a second and step back, Dalton, because you cover the college football national scene as well, and Utah fans are freaking out because this team did lose a game. There were obviously the offense had a lot of rough spots against Arizona, but I do feel like this team is not in a bad spot. They are still 4-1. They have been operating with a backup quarterback. They very well may be on Friday again. But to act like this Utah team is in disarray when we see other college football programs with one loss, we could mention Kansas State, right? And that's just even Ole Miss, Tennessee, Alabama, or you think about Utah. Yes, they lost at home. They don't normally do that by whatever. I think it was 13 at home. I think it was 13 at home, but they didn't get their doors blown off like a Missouri did. And I'm not ready to abandon Missouri and say they're terrible. So I just think it's way too early in the season for us to really, unless it's Florida State. I'm sorry, Florida State. Anyone but Florida State, I'm still like, okay, we have still seen enough from pretty much all these teams, especially only the one-loss teams, where I'm like, they can still find a way, figure things out. I still have a lot of faith in this Utah team, even though I don't know when Cam Rising's coming back.
Yeah, no, I got you. And I think long-term, that is the biggest thing I don't think Isaac Wilson will bring Utah to the playoff if he starts every game
Agreed.
This year, going forward. So I think the big thing for Utah, if Rising's going to be week to week, fine, keep playing your brand of football. And like you said, it's not like they got blown out against Arizona. Finish a couple red zone drives. Fafita made some plays. He's a great player. It is what it is, right? And that could be a different game. But I think these next 3 games are really important. When you talk about Arizona State, TCU, and Houston, okay, I think Utah is going to be favored in all 3 of these games. If you get 3 wins there, all of a sudden, you're 4-1 in conference. The end of Utah's schedule is something, I think, because you've got BYU, Colorado, Iowa State, and at UCF, and those cross-country trips have not been kind to teams either. So I wouldn't take that last game lightly, despite UCF just now losing 2 games. But those are some good teams. Look, BYU's really good this year. They're a solid football team. I think Colorado is big time on the ascent, and if you have Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter, they can beat you. And Iowa State's, look, they're number 11 in the country right now. We can't deny that. So I think these next 3 games are very big. And if at the very least, if you can get Cam Rising back for that BYU game in November, I think then we start talking about, okay, if we got through here and you're 7-1 and you're going into your last 4, and these are 4 tough games, you could probably afford one more loss at that point. But an early loss in the next 3 weeks, a second conference loss, would be worrying. So it is the part. I think Utah's got a really good football team, as good as any team in the conference, but just like last year, you don't want the quarterback situation to sink you. You need Cam Rising back soon.
They definitely need Cam Rising back soon. And it's fascinating, Dalton. This is what we love about college football. Right? Going into the season, Utah was picked to have one of the easiest schedules in college football. It's not one of the most difficult schedules in college football, but the way that end of the season is starting to shake out. And I remember a time when we were talking about, oh, it's a good thing that Utah dodges Kansas this year. Well, I don't feel that way anymore. I'd be down to swap out a Kansas for an Iowa State with the way the Cyclones are looking right now. So that's what we love about the sport. Things play themselves out on the field. Totally agree with you that Utah is really set up for just if Cam doesn't come back right away and they're able to get the win at Arizona State, that's their toughest game of the next 3 weeks. I feel confident for them against TCU and against Houston, no matter who's at quarterback, just based on what we've seen from those teams. But this will be their toughest matchup. So if they can stay good with Isaac Wilson there, it's good. And then after that is where you're really going to need Cam Rising to come back. But it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out on Friday night. Dalton, this was a blast. So people can follow you and just absorb more of the great content you guys have at PFF. Where should they head over to?
PFF.com for all our written content. With a PFF Plus subscription, you can see all the grades and numbers that we look at all the time for our shows and things like that. Sunday mornings and Tuesday nights, we have our college football preview show where we preview the biggest games every week. It's up on our YouTube channel now, the PFF College Football channel. We're certainly doing this game, Utah and Arizona State, along with several other Big 12 games and the biggest games of the week. We've got Ohio State, Oregon up as well. That's going to be a huge one. So PFF College Football Show on YouTube. Subscribe today. Sundays and Tuesdays, we go live with reviews and previews.
Dalton, this was a blast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes. We'll be back with you tomorrow. We'll have Locked On Arizona State's Richie Bradshaw joining us for a crossover to continue to just discuss all the intricacies of this matchup. That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow.